Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Joining us this week is a familiar guest. I always introduce him just as Rick Bozich, but it kind of seems silly. I was talking to Ryan about this the other day. He's also my dad. He's back on the show. So welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. And how you doing today?
Doing okay. I'm doing okay. I got a couple stories right after we get done and watch some football this weekend. Louisville's playing for a shot in the ACC championship game, so that'll be interesting. And then Sunday, there's Indiana and Louisville both playing, so we'll see what happens.
So I want to talk about Indiana's 3-0 start. Mike Woodson, in his post game last night, seemed a little bit annoyed about kind of the negative slant to some of the questions, and at one point said, well, if we would have lost any of the games, and it kind of would be a bigger issue. But Indiana is 3-0, and they have had some contests, I think all three, that have been maybe closer than people expected. You look at kind of what the Ken Pom projection was or the point spread, and they've not won any of the three games maybe as convincingly as people had thought going in, but the wins are there. What have been just your general observations through three games of this team in terms of what's gone well and what also maybe are reasons for concern moving forward?
Okay, I'll try not to ramble too much, but I begin with this. First of all, I'm not surprised that there's been some unevenness to the play. I don't think people are realistic in looking at how much this team had to replace. Trace Jackson Davis, one of the best players all time at Indiana. He's gone to the NBA and outperformed what anybody projected he would do. So first of all, replacing him was going to be a huge thing and not happen in three games. Secondly, Jalen Hood-Schifino is a really good player who also was a lottery pick. He's not obviously doing as much for the Lakers, but he was a really good college player who was good from the very start of his career. And then you had Miller Kopp and Race Thompson, who were both, 5 and 6 year guys, which means not only were they experienced in how to play, they were men, physically mature men. So Indiana is replacing a real lot, probably as much as anybody in the country. So the second thing I would say is it's November 17th. I'm old enough to remember when the college basketball season didn't even start till December the 1st. So everybody needs to calm down. And thirdly, they do have things to work on, but a lot of teams have things to work on. I actually was in Assembly Hall for the first two games. And the defense has to get better. I know that Mike Woodson knows the defense has to get better. And that's the number one thing I think they need to work on. And the other thing I would say is he needs to find what's the right word? It seems like the five guys he started so far, I'm not sure fit together the best of any lineup they can have. There's the front court pieces, I guess. It kind of clogged up. And I know everybody's very, what's the right word? Angry, concerned, mystified about the 3-point shooting because they've given up so many and made so few. And that is, to me, that's a more legitimate concern at this point is why are they giving up so many threes by guys? The Army guy who didn't score in the game before comes in and has 20 points and hits 4 threes. The Wright State guy who had a field goal all year hits 6 or 7 threes. I mean, once you get against better teams that have guys who can really make threes, they better have that figured out or that's going to be hard to overcome. So sorry to ramble, but I think there's legitimate reason for concern, but there's also legitimate reasons why it's happening.
So in terms of the defense, it's been, if you look back to Mike Woodson's first Indiana team, the reason they were able to kind of stay afloat that season in Big Ten play and then ultimately push through, have that run in the Big Ten tournament was the defense. They had the best defense in the Big Ten his first year. It kind of took a little bit of a slide backwards last season. And then this year, obviously, still figuring things out. We don't know where it's going to end up. Like you said, they've only played 3 games, and we don't necessarily know how much better they can get. But in terms of the 3-point shooting, you've watched enough basketball over the course of your career to see some of the things that they're doing wrong. From my perspective, and I'm curious if you agree with this, a lot of it starts out on the perimeter, because if guys are getting breakdowns, guys driving right past them, and then if somebody has to help, that's kind of where the opportunity is for guys to kick out to shooters. And I think you made an interesting point just about the lineup. When you have guys, and this is nothing against Mbakwe, Ware, or Renew, but they're probably not as comfortable guarding 17 to 20 feet away from the basket than they are in the paint, and they're being put in positions that are difficult for them. Maybe you make one small mistake and a guy gets open for a sliver of opportunity. It's an open three. So how much do you think it's the lineup, and how much do you think it's the scheme, just in terms of guys maybe not understanding what they're supposed to do? Because it's not like Mike Woodson forgot how to coach defense. Like I said, the first year he was in Bloomington, he had the best defense in the Big Ten. So he's obviously proven he can put together a scheme that works. But it feels to me like there's either a personnel problem in terms of just how these pieces fit together defensively, or guys maybe just not understanding the basic concepts of what they need to be doing.
Yeah, I think the first thing is the not understanding how to play the defense Mike Woodson wants to play. It looks like sometimes there's a lack of communication. There's miscommunication or misunderstanding of, when they need to switch and when they're not switching, and when they should rotate. And it almost seems like they're over rotating too many times. They're doubling guys, and it's not like they're leaving shooters are open like a little bit. Guys are like, there's not some of these times like 7 feet around them. I mean, guys don't understand what he's asking them to do. They're not in the right position. So that's only going to get fixed by more practice and more film study and guys committing to making it better. The second thing I would say is, I think you need to get better defense from Xavier Johnson and Galloway in terms of absolutely putting pressure on the basketball. I've not seen opposing guards come into Assembly Hall and feel uncomfortable. And I'm surprised by that, because Xavier Johnson and Galloway, I think both of those guys, that's part of their calling card, is to be really good defenders. I mean, they've been okay, but they haven't been great. And the third thing is, the big lineup is not real swift in terms of, being able to make movements out on the perimeter. And, as much as people criticized Miller Kopp last year because of his inconsistencies shooting threes and sometimes not being a great rebounder, he was a good defender. And Mbakwe is not a good defender at this point. He's not often down in his stance. He seems to be not knowing where to be. And he's going to have to, have some growing pains and figure it out, because I think until he does, when the game's on the line, it's hard to have him out there. You're better off having Cups or even CJ Gunn, who I don't know how they evaluate defenders, but for me, from the eye test, CJ Gunn seems to be one of the better defenders. He at least shows energy or an appetite that he wants to defend.
With Mbakwe, it feels like to me that in order for him to kind of get things going, he's going to need to lock in more on the defensive end, because Mike Woodson demands that. And I feel like if he can get things going on that end of the court, it'll help him maybe stop pressing as much offensively and become more comfortable just in terms of where his shots are going to come from. If you watched last night early in the game, I thought he came out and played pretty well the first 5 to 10 minutes, brought decent energy. And then when he came back in the game later, it was like he reverted back to some of the early habits that he showed in the first 2 games, where I think that's also the sign of a young player kind of learning the game. It's not just come out and get a 15-point lead and then the game's over and you stop playing. And I think Indiana kind of fell into that just as a team as well last night. Well, they got up 28-13. They were feeling good about themselves, and Mike Woodson made some subs. And then I think the starters came back in with a pretty healthy lead, and then the defense wasn't anywhere close to what it was to start the game. So that's kind of another growth opportunity. But speaking specifically to Mbakwe, Has anything surprised you with him on either end of the court? I've been a little bit, I didn't watch him a ton in high school, watched him film, but to me, he seems a little bit more reliant just on shooting jumpers and maybe getting to the rim and going off the dribble a little bit less than, you read things about him coming in. He's a 3-level scorer. He can get to the rim, but he doesn't necessarily seem comfortable yet putting the ball on the floor. And I wonder if once he adds that to his game, or if he can add that to his game, if that will maybe open some other things up. Because right now you just basically have to play him to come off screens and as a shooter.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like a guy who's confused and not confident and not comfortable and understanding what his role is. I agree he did play better against Wright State. But yeah, I don't know whether it's because Ware and Renew are more inside players that he's not really going down in there and being involved, but he should be able to at his size. He's got the length and the physicality to his game. I've been surprised he hasn't tried to get himself going by trying to drive to the rim and score around the rim or get fouled and go to the line. I know last night there was one stretch when the game was still kind of going back and forth where he took back-to-back threes from the left corner and missed them both. And I think on both possessions after that, his guy scored on both of them. It was a really bad stretch for him. He looks a little bit like a guy who's still playing, who could get away with doing what he did in high school and not really like sprinting up and down the court every time. He's not, and it's like, if you do that against Yukon, you're going to get embarrassed because I've seen Yukon play this year and I saw him play last year live, and they go high octane the whole game. So he's going to have to up his intensity level, I think, and be a little bit more aggressive and faster up and down the court.
One guy who has been super productive, maybe even a little bit surprising, because I don't know if we knew exactly what to expect out of him. Khalil Ware, the transfer from Oregon, has been, in my opinion, Indiana's best player through the first 3 games this season. He doesn't always look demonstrative or energetic out there, but then you look at the box score at the end of the game and he's doing a lot of good things, blocking shots, finishing at a pretty high clip in terms of his efficiency, getting rebounds. He's been their best rebounder. Still, to me, at times it looks like is getting overwhelmed a little bit at the rim by certain guys that, put a chest into him or trying to finish plays at the rim. You can get an advantage of him if you just maybe use your body. And I wonder how that's going to work against some of the Big Ten teams that have bigger guys in the post, but not much to complain about with him so far. What are your takeaways just from watching him the first 3 games? And do you see this kind of continuing just in terms of him being maybe the focal point for Indiana on both ends of the court, really as a guy that can protect the rim and also score in a variety of ways offensively?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's been their best player. He's been their top scorer. He's been a good rebounder. He doesn't hunch shots. He seems to play within the offense. He's shown the ability to make free throws. I know he's made at least 1 3, but he's comfortable. He's a good enough shooter that I think if he goes out there and makes 1 or 2 in another game, people have to, guard him out there. He's done a good job working the high-low with Renew. Yeah, I mean, the only thing that he has, well, not the only thing, but the number one thing he needs to work with is Cliff Marshall and keep getting stronger, lower body, upper body, hold his position and show that he can play in physical games. But I haven't seen, not like he shies away from it. He's just not physically mature enough. He's still young. He's growing into his body, and he's been better than I thought he was going to be. And he's got a great skill set of a lot of different things that he can do. I can understand why he was ranked one of the top 10 players in his class and why Oregon really wanted him.
So this weekend, Indiana plays Yukon on Sunday afternoon, and the second game of that doubleheader is Texas and Louisville. 2 games that when you kind of look at it on paper, based on the results so far, you look what Yukon has done. I think all of their games they've won by 30 so far, at least, maybe. And Louisville has been, they've already lost a home game. They're 2-1, I believe, and not totally similar to Indiana, but just some performances at home that have not been very good. So it could be a situation where Indiana gets a really stiff test on Sunday against Yukon and then have a chance to maybe play Louisville on Monday, depending on how it goes. What's Indiana going to have to do against Yukon to be able to keep that game competitive? Do you think they're going to be able to make it a game with Yukon? And then looking ahead to the Louisville Texas game, is that another one that figures to be a kind of one team, the heavy favorite going in?
I haven't seen UConn play this year. I know they're 3-0. They've beaten the three teams they've beaten are ranked 241 or worse, and Ken Palm and Stonehill and Mississippi Valley are like two of the 15 worst teams in the country. So
yeah,
and I know that Army wasn't any good either. They got talent. They got leftover guys from a national championship team. They got good freshmen. Tristan Newton's a really good player. Cam Spencer hurt Indiana last year when he was at Rutgers. He can really shoot the threes, 11 for 24 so far this season. Caravan's a guy Indiana wanted. He's a big guy who can shoot the three. Klingon will be, a size. He'll be able to match where inside size-wise. They're kind of similar players in some ways in terms of that neither one of them is physically dominant. But the big thing will be guard. Connecticut will play very aggressive. They'll be very assertive at the guard position. And with Indiana, the status of Xavier Johnson, whether he will play and if he does play, how healthy he'll be, will be a big concern. I look at, is it right that UConn's, they're making 33% of their threes, but it looks like they're taking 46% of their field goal attempts are from three. Is that right? I don't know. It'll be a hard game, and it'll be a hard game from the standpoint of those guys are used to playing in Madison Square Garden. They played there last year, the Big East tournament. They'll easily have the most fans there because their fans are closer to UConn campus. From Stores to New York City is a short train ride away. Their fans are jacked up because they won the national championship. It'll be a really hard game for Indiana. I see Ken Palm gives them, a 15% chance of winning. I'd say that might be a little optimistic unless Indiana plays better than it's played in its first three games.
Yeah, you look at their offensive rebounding percentage too. They're second in the country, and Indiana has been really poor on the defensive glass so far. I think some of that is the amount of threes that they're giving up. But as you mentioned, they're actually not giving up threes. These teams are choosing to take more threes because that's the open shot. But, I think that problem can continue against UConn, given what you just said. They're 39th in the country in terms of percentage of field goal attempts coming from three. So they're taking a high volume of threes. And I'm sure they've watched the film on Indiana so far and see that they're not really doing the greatest job in the world being able to contest threes and get out to shooters. So they're not going to be shy to let those shots go up from the perimeter. In terms of Texas and Louisville, kind of the same thing in terms of it being a lopsided matchup and Ken Palm going in. What's your feeling on Louisville just through the first three games? I know you've watched them play in person a couple of times. I've watched them on TV a couple of times. I feel like the talent's better, but I still feel like there's something missing right now with them. And I think it's going to be an uphill battle for them as well against Texas.
Yeah, I haven't seen Texas play at all. I know that they're ranked in the top 25. They beat Rice. They've scored over 80 every game, so they're offensively minded. They got is it Avmus? Is that his name? The kid that came from Oregon. He's a good player. He's a guard. Tyrese Hunter's a good player. It's like they got three guys shooting 46% or higher from three, so they're going to come out bombing threes too. So I'm sure they're good. I'm not sure they're great. Louisville is just a team that's struggling in a lot of different ways. They lost an exhibition game to Kentucky Wesleyan. They're fortunate to beat UMBC by 1. They got beat by Chattanooga by 10, and they were down 21 with less than 7 to play. And then they finally took care of Coppin State, a very bad team, but they only scored 61 points in that game. I don't know. They got a lot of issues. They're not a great shooting team from three. Haven't been a great defensive team. Haven't been a great rebounding team, and the confidence level really isn't there because they've struggled for a number of years. I think they've they've got some talented guys, but they're still trying to figure it out too. They got a couple really nice freshmen. I really like Curtis Williams, and I think Tyler Johnson will eventually be a good player. They're not great inside. I think they'll have a hard time matching up with Ware and Renew. They go usually with Brandon Huntley Hatfield. He'd probably be the guy who would take Ware, and then JJ Trainer would have, and Renew is a lot stronger, more physical player. But what I'm more interested in how Indiana responds and matches up with Yukon at this point, because that's going to be the schedule. Kansas comes after that. Auburn's not bad. Harvard's reasonably good. Indiana's
at Michigan looks a lot harder than it once did. Maryland at home.
They got a lot of challenging games ahead until they get to Morehead State. So they need to see. I look at Ken Palm's got them losing 1, 2, 3, 4 of the next 6. So that doesn't include the second game in the Garden. So,
do you think this was a good strategy from Mike Woodson to load the schedule up like this, kind of knowing what obviously hindsight's always 2020, but when you look at just he did kind of ease into things with these 3 early games, and I'm sure he probably thought it would be go a little bit more smoothly over these first 3 games. But you just look at the schedule, playing. Obviously, he didn't set the matchups for the Empire Classic, but playing Yukon and playing Kansas, playing Auburn, to me is just kind of. I think it's good from the program perspective of, hey, we're willing to do anything and play anybody like they kind of did last year. They played Arizona and Kansas. Neither one of those games went very well, but at least they showed they were willing to play those games. But just looking at this team and where it is and with all the new pieces, just seems like a little bit of an ambitious schedule, but I guess they can only get better from it. And I guess the other part of that is if you just play a bunch of sub 300 teams and stack up wins, you don't really learn anything about yourself.
Yeah, I think it's the right thing to do. If you want to consider yourself a program that wants to be at the highest levels of the game, you got to schedule that way and not schedule afraid. And you're going to take some losses. That's one of the trade-offs, but you should find out some stuff about your team, legitimately what your weaknesses are where you have to improve and who wants to compete at that level and who doesn't. I think it's the right thing to do. People just have to know that when you do that, losses are possible. People, if you go the other way, people complain these are meaningless games and what does it really prove and all that stuff. And now that they've not won impressively in the first 3 games, people are already complaining. And that's sort of, I guess, what I got from Woodson's response to a question last night that they're 3-0, but people are acting like they're 0-3. But he has to be able to realize that he's at Indiana, and when he played there, people would have responded the same way and expected the same kind of results. We'll know a lot more after they leave Madison Square Garden, how good they really are. And I don't know. They do have to get better play. Banks and Gunn, he keeps talking. Those guys are sophomores. It's time for them, when he puts them in the game, to have impact. They've had a little bit of impact, but not a whole lot of impact. But they're going to have impact, and it's just where they're at right now. I think it's the Xavier Johnson thing is just so huge. If he can't play against Yukon, they're really in trouble.
Yeah, I'm guessing we probably won't know until the game starts what
Monday
his status will be. It was an interesting thing. I just wanted to kind of follow up with one thing you said, just in terms of the fans kind of not being patient. And I'm curious, it just like as somebody who's covered college basketball as long as you have, it's a different era now in terms of social media, but you cover obviously 3 programs where the fan bases are super engaged and super passionate about their teams, Kentucky, Indiana, Louisville. Is this how it's always been, just in terms of people maybe not being patient when a season starts and letting a team grow into itself? Or do you think it's gotten worse and we fixate on it more now in the era of when we can read comments on Inside the Hall, for example, or read comments on Twitter, Facebook? It seems like that stuff's maybe just right there in front of us now, but do you think anything's changed just in terms of expectations for these high level programs? And do you think NIL has anything to do with that, either in terms of being able to just kind of restack your roster every year, and then people think all of a sudden you're going to be good, because Indiana really went out and got Ware and Mbakwe last spring, and I think that kind of raised people's expectations for the program. And had they not gotten those guys, the expectations would have been much lower, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, what's different is more people have a voice now. Back, 20 or 30 years ago, the only voices were, the newspaper guys who covered the teams, or, whoever was talking on TV. And then, Peaks came along, and there was message boards, and that joined on. And then, you and some of the other people started doing stuff, and there were more voices. And then Twitter gave even more people voices, and podcasts, it gave even more people voices. And, the way to enhance your voice is to say something to get people to respond to it. And, and Indiana fan, the second thing I would say is that there's so much pent up demand with Indiana fan base of having success, the kind of success that the program used to have, that there's a lot of frustration out there, that it's been so long since they've been to a Final Four. It's been so long since they've been consistently a dominant team in the Big Ten, that people don't want to wait. And we saw it Mike Davis, they started grumbling after about the third or fourth year, maybe. Second year he went to the Final Four, and then the third year wasn't good. And the fourth year they started grumbling, and he was gone in 6 years. Green, they were kind of patient through 3 really bad years. And then after they had back-to-back Sweet 16s and had a bad year, they lost that game to Syracuse, people started grumbling. And Archie, they really started grumbling pretty quickly after the first year. He lost that game to Indiana State, and I think he lost the IPFW. So it's just been in the bloodstream now for a while. And Woodson raised expectations a little bit by going to back-to-back NCAA tournaments, but really not achieving anything that's noteworthy by the kind of standards Indiana wants to have. So people want more, and they want it quickly. Patience is not valued anymore. And I understand that, in part because it's hard to be patient when you don't even think the players that are there this year who are younger will be around. If like you knew Khalil Ware was a sophomore and he had 2 more years in Indiana, people could be patient. If you knew that Mbakwe was a freshman and had 2 or 3 more years in Indiana, people could be patient. But when they look at those guys and say they're only going to be here this year and they're gone, and what's going to be there next year, people start getting nervous. So it's just an entirely different world than the way it used to be. And I think that explains a lot of it.
Well, thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it. Always enjoy having you on, and follow your work at WDRB and WDRB.com. And as for Podcast on the Brink, we will be back soon with another episode. If you enjoy the show, leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating on Spotify, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks, everybody, for listening.